He was just sitting on a bench, holding a folder and a bottle of water, waiting for the bus like he'd done every Thursday for therapy. But that morning, his quiet courage was mistaken for defiance. In a split second, a decorated war hero became a threat in the eyes of someone who didn't understand the invisible wounds of war. What followed was heartbreaking, unjust, and unforgettable. Until something no one expected happened. Black SUVs, federal agents, a truth revealed that silenced an entire city. This is not just the story of Master Sergeant John Ramirez. It's the story of every veteran who returns home to a world that doesn't always know how to see them, hear them, or protect them. But today, the system didn't fail. It remembered. And for one soldier, the words, "We've got your six," still meant everything. John flinched. The edge in the officer's voice cut through him like a blade. Years of training kicked in. Hands still, eyes down, movements measured. But the trembling in his fingers gave him away. To Cole, it was suspicion. To John, it was fear. Then came the crackling hum. The taser fired. In a blink, 50,000 volts surged into John Ramirez's chest. His body convulsed, arms jerking violently as the folder slipped from his hands and scattered across the pavement. His appointment papers, the VA card, even Dr. Hall's handwritten note. "You're doing great, John, just one step at a time." None of it mattered now. John collapsed, knees first, hard onto the concrete. His face hit next. His cap rolled into the gutter. He didn't fight back. He didn't scream. Just a low grunt and then stillness. The officer stood over him, breathing hard, taser still drawn, as if expecting a retaliation that never came. A moment passed. Then another. Sirens wailed faintly in the distance, but on that corner, time stood still. No crowd, no protest. Just one man on the ground and another unsure what had just unfolded. 6 minutes later, the scene changed entirely. A black convoy of SUVs rolled down Riverside Avenue, breaking every red light without hesitation. The U.S. Department of Defense SEAL gleamed on their sides. Men in suits, some with earpieces, stepped out and formed a silent wall around the bus stop. They didn't say much. They didn't need to. John Ramirez wasn't just a loitering old man. He was a decorated Army Ranger, a war hero, a Bronze Star recipient. The man on the ground had once led elite reconnaissance teams through Afghan valleys so dangerous that entire units avoided them. He'd saved lives, fought for freedom, bled for the very country that now shocked him into the pavement. But on that street corner, nobody remembered that. Not until now. News spread fast. Bystander footage leaked within hours. City officials scrambled for statements. The mayor's office went silent. The police chief ordered a review. But nothing could contain the fury that swept across the city that night. Not just from veterans, but from civilians too. Because John Ramirez didn't wear his medals on his chest or talk about his past. He wore his pain quietly. In the way he walked, the silence in his apartment, the steady way he showed up to therapy every Thursday. That morning, he was doing everything right, and still, it wasn't enough to be seen. He didn't fit the image Officer Cole expected. He looked tired, maybe even suspicious, but not heroic, not valuable, just disposable. No charges were filed against John. There was nothing to charge. But Cole? He faced suspension pending investigation. His department issued a sterile statement about protocol and unfortunate misunderstandings. But the damage was already done. The bench where John sat was soon covered in flags, candles, and handwritten notes. "We see you now," one sign read. Another simply said, "Forgive us." At the VA clinic, Dr. Hall sat alone in her office that afternoon, staring at the empty chair across from her. His folder was still on her desk, a small sticky note stuck to the front. "Rode the bus again. Felt strong today." For a man like John, just waiting for the bus had taken every ounce of bravery. And for a country that promised to honor its heroes, that should have been enough. Suddenly, John rose. I said clearly, "Stand up, hands where I can see them." He froze, confused. "Sir, I said stand," I repeated, firmer now, "but don't move your hands." The commands contradicted each other, and in John's mind, shaped by years of combat and trauma, it felt like a trap. His instincts kicked in. He paused to assess, to reevaluate the threat. But in that brief moment of hesitation, Officer Cole saw an opportunity to escalate. Without giving John another chance, Cole raised his taser and fired. The electric probe struck John directly in the chest. In an instant, 50,000 volts surged through his body, locking every muscle, paralyzing his limbs, and slamming him onto the hard concrete. His knees smashed the ground first. His arms flailed wildly as his nervous system lit up in a storm of confusion and pain. A folder filled with his VA paperwork slipped from his hand, landing unnoticed beside him. John screamed, not only from the agony of the shock, but from the overwhelming helplessness. This was worse than war. In combat, at least you knew who your enemies were. Here, on a city sidewalk, surrounded by civilians, he was under attack by someone who was supposed to protect. Pedestrians turned at the commotion. A few pulled out their phones to record. Others stared in silence. No one stepped in. No one moved. Officer Cole stood over John and shouted, "Stop resisting!" But John couldn't move. He couldn't speak. He could barely breathe. And this is the cruel reality veterans like John face every day. Their injuries invisible until they're violently triggered. PTSD doesn't announce itself like a broken bone. A traumatic brain injury doesn't bleed. It lies quiet and dormant until a sharp command, a raised voice, a flicker of fear detonates something deep inside. John wasn't being defiant. He wasn't a threat. He was simply trying to stay calm, doing what his therapist had trained him to do, taking the bus to therapy, sticking to routine. Just another day, just following orders, because that's what soldiers do. But even so, he was treated as dangerous. His silence became suspicion, his discipline mistaken for defiance. To Officer Cole, John Ramirez wasn't a veteran. He was a threat. And in a city where so few truly understand the price of invisible wounds, Cole made the same fatal error too many have before. He let fear dictate his actions, and John paid the price. John's body hit the pavement with a sickening thud. His head whipped to the side, muscles tightening under the force of the current. His jaw clenched so tightly he bit through his tongue. His limbs jerked beyond control. His chest rose and fell in rapid, panicked gasps. The electricity may have stopped, but the storm inside him had only begun. To those watching, it looked like resistance, a man thrashing against arrest. But inside John's brain, everything had collapsed. He wasn't on Riverside Avenue anymore. He was back in Afghanistan, the sound of mortar fire ringing in his ears, the acrid smell of dust and smoke. He could hear the distant cries over the radio, feel the scorch of heat from an explosion. And beside him, Sergeant Cruz, his friend, his medic, motionless on the hot ground. John tried to crawl. His arms moved weakly, but his legs wouldn't respond. He was trapped, just like before. Only this time, he wasn't on foreign soil. He was home, but the terror felt the same. People kept filming. Across the street, someone hit record. A voice murmured, "Is he on something?" A woman with a coffee shook her head slowly and said, "No, that's a veteran. I've seen him here before." Still, no one moved to help. No one came close. No one extended a hand. Because in moments like these, fear drowns out compassion. Officer Darren Cole remained standing above John, taser still drawn, his breath short and sharp. "Subject is non-compliant," he said into his radio, "possibly under the influence. Had to use non-lethal force." He didn't mention that John had been sitting quietly before his arrival. Didn't mention the VA folder lying open on the sidewalk, fluttering in the breeze. Didn't mention the fear in John's eyes. Not anger, not rage, but a pleading, desperate confusion, like his world had just been torn apart. John tried to speak. His voice was a broken whisper. I'm not." His fingers fumbled at his chest, reaching for the folder, trying to point, to explain. But to Cole, those small, shaky movements looked like more resistance. "Stay down," Cole barked again, stepping closer. And just like that, John's panic deepened. His breathing spiraled. He gasped for air, but it wouldn't come. His lungs seized. His heart pounded so fast it felt like it might burst. He wasn't just frightened, he was disassociating. His mind had pulled away from his body, trying to survive what it believed was life-threatening. The background noise of the city faded into a high-pitched hum. Honking horns, murmured voices, footsteps, all melted into static. John Ramirez was having a full-blown PTSD episode on the sidewalk of a city that didn't know what to do with him. that didn't know how to help. This was the moment no therapy could fully protect against. The exact moment Dr. Lena Hall had warned about. The thin line between control and collapse. The fragile barrier veterans walk every day between healing and a sudden violent flashback. Between seeming fine and being pulled under by the weight of years of trauma. And still, no one helped. Still, Officer Cole radioed for backup, reinforcing the lie. Subject is unstable, appears dangerous, awaiting assistance. No one truly understood what was happening. No one knew the man on the ground wasn't a threat. John Ramirez wasn't dangerous. He was a wounded veteran fighting to breathe, clinging to life moment by moment. All he needed was someone to look beyond the uniform, beyond the fear, and see what the badge had missed. But for now, he lay crumpled on the cold concrete, his body trembling uncontrollably, his breath shallow and erratic. He was caught in a war that never really ended for him. John's heart pounded dangerously fast, his pulse well beyond the threshold of safety. His arms jerked involuntarily, legs twitching in confusion, every nerve misfiring from an internal storm invisible to those around him. But what no one on that crowded sidewalk could see, not even Officer Darren Cole, the one who had pulled the trigger, was the tiny, nearly invisible device sewn discreetly inside John's jacket, just below his collarbone. No larger than a quarter, the black disc was a high-grade biometric monitor issued by the government to veterans deemed high risk, those with extensive combat exposure and serious post-traumatic stress. John's file was classified as Tier 1, multiple head traumas, severe PTSD, a risk for dissociation and psychological collapse. The moment his vitals spiked, his heart rate soaring above 180, his neurological patterns shifting into chaos, the device did exactly what it was built for. It sent a secure emergency signal, a satellite ping, encrypted, immediate, routed straight to two endpoints. His VA caseworker and a classified medical response team operated under the Department of Defense. 4 minutes after Officer Cole fired the taser, the first black SUV rolled onto the street. To the crowd, it looked like another unmarked police unit. Then a second followed. Then a third. No lights, no sirens. Just quiet, confident speed. They pulled in fast, surrounding the intersection with smooth precision. One SUV blocked the curb, another slid across the crosswalk. The third stopped dead center. Their arrival wasn't rushed. It was planned, practiced, military. From the doors emerged 6 individuals, all dressed in identical charcoal gray suits. No badges, no name tags, no hesitation. Their movements were synchronized, deliberate, not police, something higher. At their front walked a tall, broad-shouldered man with a calm, stone-like presence. No visible weapon, just commanding authority. In one hand, he carried a slim leather folder trimmed in gold. In the other, an ID wallet marked with the unmistakable insignia of the Pentagon's Office of Protective Affairs. He approached Officer Cole directly. "Are you the responding officer?" His voice was low, controlled. Cole hesitated, confused. "Yes, I had to subdue." "Step back, officer," the man said before Cole could finish. "What? Wait, who are you?" The man held up his badge at eye level. "Special Agent Robert King, Department of Defense. You are currently standing over Master Sergeant John Anthony Ramirez, United States Army Rangers retired, highly decorated, medically classified. You just tased a federally monitored combat veteran under active Department of Defense protection, and you did it without cause or coordination." The blood drained from Officer Cole's face. "I thought he was on something. He wasn't responding." "He's under psychiatric observation for combat-induced trauma," King cut in firmly. "His biometric monitor triggered an emergency alert. You are not authorized to engage with any individual in his classification without direct federal coordination. That protocol has now been activated. Step aside. Immediately." The tone on the street shifted in an instant. What had moments ago been tense confusion now dropped into stunned silence. The murmuring crowd grew quiet, processing what they had just heard. A woman holding a coffee gasped, then whispered, "Wait, he's military?" 2 of King's agents swiftly moved through the area, scanning the scene with precision. One began taking photos, another used a portable device to scan the spilled papers from John's folder. They marked where the taser wires had landed. Every move was calculated. One agent knelt beside John, his voice calm, his touch steady. Not just a medic, but someone trained for this exact situation. He spoke softly, clearly familiar with trauma response. "You're okay now, Sergeant. You're safe. We've got you." Meanwhile, another agent stepped directly to Officer Cole and removed the body cam footage from his uniform. Without asking, Cole didn't resist. He only stepped back, hands slightly raised, shaken. "No one told me." "You didn't ask," King replied sharply. "You assumed, you acted, and now you're under federal review." The balance of power flipped instantly. The man who had been seen as a potential threat was now revealed as a protected hero, a man marked by service and sacrifice. And the one who held the taser, who stood in command only moments before, now found himself exposed, scrutinized, with the full weight of the Pentagon bearing down on him. As the crowd watched in hushed awe, the DoD team worked with unwavering professionalism. While King oversaw the legal aftermath, two medics in plain dark jackets, not fatigues, knelt beside John with practiced calm. No shouting, no panic. They moved like people who had seen this before. "Sergeant Ramirez," one of them said gently, placing a gloved hand on his shoulder. "We're with you. You're safe. You're not in Afghanistan. You're in New Mexico. Deep breaths, okay?" His words cut through the fog of panic swirling inside John's mind. They were grounding like a rope thrown into the raging storm of disorientation. John's body still trembled, his muscles twitching under the aftershock of the taser. But his eyes slowly started to focus. The medics worked swiftly, checking his pulse, scanning the biometric disc, monitoring his vitals. One administered a precisely measured dose of medication, anti-anxiety, federally approved for his condition. And for the first time in minutes that felt like hours, John Ramirez took a steady breath. John's breath was shallow, ragged, teetering on the edge of collapse. One medic kneeled beside him, steadying his pulse, while another kept speaking in a calm, reassuring voice, narrating each step, every movement, so John wouldn't be caught off guard. Slowly, the panic that had overtaken him began to fade. His breathing steadied, his hands stopped shaking. When he finally found his voice, it came out strained and hoarse. "I didn't do anything wrong," he whispered, eyes searching for confirmation. "You didn't, Sergeant," the medic said softly, gently. "You didn't do anything wrong." Across town at the VA Medical Center, Elena Hall had just closed the file of another patient when a sharp alert pinged from her secure terminal. A red icon blinked on screen. "Critical, Ramirez J." Her stomach turned cold. She knew exactly what that meant. No time to waste. She grabbed her coat, her keys, and without hesitation dialed the emergency hotline linked directly to the Pentagon's Special Liaison Unit. "This is Dr. Lena Hall, VA Behavioral Services," she said firmly. "I'm en route to Riverside in 7th. Tell Agent King I'm coming." 20 minutes later, Lena pulled up to a scene already thick with federal presence. John was seated on the edge of a Pentagon SUV's tailgate, wrapped in a silver thermal blanket. A medic stood close, monitoring his vitals. John's eyes found her instantly, lighting up despite the exhaustion painted across his face. "Doc," Lena dropped to her knees in front of him, not caring about the crowd or the cameras. "You did everything right, John," she said gently, firmly. "You stuck to the routine. You followed protocol. This wasn't your fault." John opened his mouth to speak, but emotion caught in his throat. "I was just waiting for the bus." "I know," she said, squeezing his hand. "And the system worked." She stood and turned to the group of Pentagon agents nearby. "Thank you for responding so quickly." Agent King nodded. The moment his heart rate spiked, his wearable sent an emergency ping through our encrypted network. We were less than 5 miles away. Lena looked around at the bystanders still gathered. "They don't know it yet, but you probably saved his life, again." King's voice was low but certain. "He's not the first, and he won't be the last." The device John wore was part of a quietly implemented pilot program, a joint initiative between the Department of Defense and the VA. Embedded discreetly in jackets, watches, or med kits, these biometric sensors monitored veterans' vitals and trauma responses. If the system detected an emergency, be it medical or psychological, It immediately sent out a signal to federal response teams and VA case managers. Since its inception, the system had already saved over 80 lives. These weren't just any patients. They were the country's most vulnerable defenders, men and women who had put everything on the line in service, only to come home to a society still struggling to understand how to help them heal. Lena turned back to John, her voice soft but resolute. You didn't just survive today, John. You proved that the system works. You proved that you are still worth protecting. John gave a faint nod. It, it didn't feel like that at first. I know, she said, offering a quiet, sad smile. That's because too many people out there don't see what we see. But you're not forgotten, John, not by your country, not by all of us. As the medics gently helped him into the SUV, preparing to transport him quietly to a private room at the VA, the tension in the air began to dissipate. The crowd slowly dispersed, yet a powerful truth lingered in the silence. For the first time in a long time, John Ramirez wasn't just another invisible name buried in a government database. He wasn't just a man quietly waiting on a bus bench. He was a soldier, wounded, yes, but not abandoned. This time, help had arrived, and it had shown up wearing the uniform that meant protection, not punishment. By the time the last black SUV disappeared down Riverside Avenue, the story was already spreading across the city. Within hours, grainy phone footage flooded social media. Images of an elderly man collapsed on the ground, taser wires still attached to his body, a uniformed officer standing over him. Then the black vehicles rolling up like something out of a thriller film. Only this wasn't a movie, it was real. And it got attention. Within 12 hours, Officer Darren Cole had been placed on administrative leave pending a formal investigation. His body camera was confiscated by federal agents and handed over to both the city's Office of Internal Review and the Department of Justice's Civil Rights Division. Cole had originally claimed the use of force had been necessary, that Ramirez was erratic, possibly drunk, a threat, but the footage told a different story. It showed John sitting quietly, speaking clearly, obeying instructions, until those instructions began contradicting themselves. The situation had not escalated because of danger. It had escalated because of frustration. There was no weapon, no threat, no justification, and there was no alcohol in John's system. Pentagon medics ran a full toxicology report. It came back clean. VA paperwork retrieved from the sidewalk confirmed what should have been obvious. John Ramirez was a decorated Army veteran, listed in federal databases with a high PTSD rating and a flag clearly stating, "Do not engage with force unless life-threatening behavior is present." Officer Cole ignored every bit of that, and the Pentagon was done staying quiet. At a press conference the next morning, Agent Robert King stood beside Dr. Lena Hall. Cameras flashed. Reporters leaned in. Master Sergeant John Ramirez served this nation for 15 years, King stated. He saved lives on foreign soil, and yesterday he nearly lost his own on American pavement. Not because he was a threat, but because someone failed to understand the man sitting in front of them. He didn't need to say more. The message was clear. The system had done its job, but now the rest of the country had to decide if it would do the same. John Ramirez sat quietly on the bench that day, carrying more than just his weariness. He carried years of unspoken battles, wounds no one could see, but that never truly healed. What happened to him wasn't just wrong. It was the final fracture in a system that had long turned a blind eye to the pain of its veterans. But this time, it didn't end with silence. The ripple effect moved swiftly and far beyond just John and Officer Cole. The mayor's office came under pressure almost immediately. Veterans advocacy groups filled the front steps of City Hall, holding signs that read, "Invisible wounds are still wounds and PTSD criminal." Their voices were steady, tired, but fierce, refusing to let this become just another forgotten news cycle. Dr. Hall, a clinical psychologist who had treated hundreds of veterans like John, was summoned to speak before the city council. She didn't mince words. She testified about the disturbing frequency with which veterans were being misjudged, harmed, or arrested during mental health episodes. These weren't isolated incidents, they were systemic failures. Her voice cracked only once when she said, "They didn't survive war to be assaulted in their own neighborhoods." The Department of Defense was watching. They didn't just want accountability, they demanded change. Within 2 weeks, the Pentagon filed a formal request with Congress for legislation that would reshape how law enforcement engaged with veterans in crisis. The proposal included mandatory PTSD and trauma training for every police department receiving federal funding. Police cruisers would be equipped with biometric scanners capable of identifying veterans listed in the DoD-VA database. Cities would be required to form rapid response veteran crisis units. Teams trained to de-escalate situations like John's, modeled after the unit that ultimately helped save him. And perhaps most crucially, the legislation demanded strict penalties for law enforcement who violated the protections of the Americans with Disabilities Act when interacting with confirmed PTSD patients. They called it the Ramirez Protocol. Meanwhile, Officer Darren Cole was no longer protected by silence or indifference. The Department of Justice's Civil Rights Division opened a formal investigation into his conduct. There were questions of excessive force, of discrimination based on disability. His actions were no longer being judged by his peers in uniform, but by a nation suddenly awake to the cost of its inaction. The outcome of the investigation would take time. But one thing was certain. This wasn't going to be brushed aside. The world was watching now. John Ramirez never asked to be the face of this movement. He never sought attention. But somehow, through pain and violation, his voice had broken through. His suffering had exposed a gaping hole in the structure meant to protect those who served. And for once, the system listened. As for Officer Cole, the tables had turned. The man who once saw hesitation as weakness and control as safety now stood on the other side of judgment, the side where assumptions wound and the absence of empathy carries real consequences. For countless veterans who'd been waiting for justice, many who didn't live to see it, this moment was a long overdue reckoning. But John's experience isn't rare. His story isn't an anomaly. It's a mirror reflecting a reality most Americans still refuse to face. We send young men and women off to war, yet do almost nothing to prepare ourselves for the versions of them that come home. According to a 2022 VA report, over 30% of post-9/11 veterans exhibit symptoms of PTSD. But less than a quarter of U.S. police departments require trauma-informed training focused on veterans. That gap is more than a bureaucratic failure. It's a moral one. What happened to John Ramirez is what happens when we let power speak louder than compassion, when the instinct to dominate outweighs the duty to understand. Officer Cole didn't wake up that day intending to harm a veteran, but intent doesn't erase damage. It's the culture around him, the control first, ask later mentality, that failed both him and John. In that dangerous space between misunderstanding and aggression, too many veterans are lost, some permanently. It's not just the police. Employers misread, landlords misjudge. Even neighbors shrink away from what they don't understand. A man who avoids eye contact or flinches at loud sounds might not be unwell. He may just be surviving in a world that never taught him how to live without war. He may have been trained to clear buildings, identify threats, anticipate explosions, but no one trained him for judgment in a grocery line, suspicion at the pharmacy, discomfort on a park bench. Think about that. In a nation that spends billions on defense, we still haven't figured out how to build a bridge between our warriors and the peace they were promised. What John's case reveals is just how fragile that bridge is, and how powerful it becomes when someone finally says, "This man deserves better." The Pentagon said it, but should it take the Pentagon? Should we really need federal clearance just to believe someone is wounded, not dangerous? We need better systems, better tools. But more than that, we need better eyes. Eyes that don't just scan for threats, but recognize the quiet medals our veterans wear every day. Courage, discipline, loyalty, qualities you won't see on ribbons anymore. They live now in silence. In a man who takes a city bus to therapy, in a woman holding on to her VA folder like it's armor, in someone who sits completely still, not because he's calm, but because his mind is screaming and still he endures. John survived because someone hurt him, but too many others won't. That's why this matters. That's why we can't look away. So maybe next time, when you see someone sitting quietly at a bus stop or a man staring a little too long at the pharmacy counter, you'll pause before you judge. And you'll remember John, not as a statistic or a scandal, but as a reminder to look deeper. Because in the end, the truth is simple. Heroes shouldn't need a convoy just to be believed. The ride home was silent. John Ramirez sat in the backseat of the black SUV, a thin blanket still wrapped around his aching body. The pain wasn't just from the taser. It was from everything it had unleashed. Memories, shame, years of being unseen in the country he gave everything to protect. He leaned his head against the window, watching streetlights blur into long, soft lines of light. Somewhere, deep in that silence, something shifted inside him. Something long buried. For the first time in years, he felt seen. Not by the people who walked past him, not by the officer who mistook his stillness for a threat, but by a country finally beginning to understand. They came for him, not with fanfare or flashy tributes, not with medals or parades, but they came. The ones who remembered, the ones who understood what it meant to carry the weight of war long after the battlefield was gone. The agents from the Pentagon didn't salute him. They didn't call him a hero, and they didn't have to. Their presence alone spoke volumes. Louder than any ceremonial words ever could. They showed up. And for a soldier like John Ramirez, who once walked point through Taliban strongholds with the breath of death on his neck, that meant more than anything. Because in the military, there's a truth they teach you early and often. You never leave a man behind. That promise isn't just protocol, it's a bond, a vow that survives the discharge papers, the dusty boots, the folded uniforms. It lingers unspoken but alive, in signals exchanged across airwaves, in the simple code, "We've got your six." John looked down at his hands, scarred from years gone by, calloused from a life that never softened, and trembling, ever so slightly. He remembered the countless moments since returning home when he felt like a ghost, a burden, an afterthought in a world that had kept spinning while he sat motionless at a bus stop, trying to wrestle with symptoms the average civilian couldn't even pronounce, much less understand. But today, that belief cracked. Something real had shattered the silence. The SUV veered gently down a quiet side street. Rays of sun filtered softly through the tinted glass. John's eyes settled on a small American flag pin affixed to the dash. Maybe it belonged to another veteran who had once sat where he did, or maybe one of the agents had left it there without a word, letting it shine quietly for anyone who noticed. The pin caught a streak of light and sparkled just for a second. John raised his hand and rested it gently against the glass, not out of habit or reflex, but from somewhere deeper. Reflection, reverence. The city beyond the window wasn't his enemy. The people rushing through their lives weren't enemies either. But they didn't always know. They couldn't see the battles he still fought. And sometimes when the world forgets the war still raging in your mind, it takes something this profound, this painful, to make them remember. He didn't know what would come next, whether Officer Cole, the one who had escalated a situation instead of listening, would face consequences. Whether legislation born from today's events would pass or get lost in bureaucracy. He didn't even know if tomorrow's ride on the same bus would be safer. But he did know this. Somewhere in a secured government room, someone saw him, really saw him. Somewhere in that SUV, men who didn't know his name responded to the silent call he didn't know he made. And somewhere deep inside the worn-out shell of a soldier, a familiar ember sparked again. Because the brotherhood didn't end when the shooting stopped. It didn't fade when the war was over. It just got quieter, less visible, like the scars it left behind. John leaned back, closed his eyes, and exhaled, slow and heavy, the kind of breath you only release when you've been holding it for years. He was still here, and someone had come for him. But how many others are still waiting? John Ramirez was one of the lucky ones. Someone saw him, heard him, showed up for him. But across our streets, across this country, there are thousands of veterans walking invisible paths, shouldering burdens they never asked for, battling memories they can't escape. Many of them move through their days unnoticed. No headlines, no help, just trying to make it to their next appointment, just hoping for one night of uninterrupted sleep, just praying anyone might look their way and say, "I see you, I haven't forgotten." This story isn't just about John. It's about all the veterans whose pain is quiet, whose wounds are unseen, whose voices have never had the chance to be heard. So now we turn to you. Have you or someone you love been through something like this? Share your story in the comments. Your words might be the lifeline someone else needs today. Support mental health programs for veterans in your own community. Whether it's volunteering, donating, or simply speaking up, your action matters more than you know. And if this story moved you, if it made you pause before passing a stranger who looks lost, who looks tired, who looks invisible, subscribe to our channel. We share true stories like John's, raw, real, and filled with quiet courage. Because not all heroes wear uniforms. Some are just quiet souls carrying heavy hearts and powerful truths. Don't let their stories fade into silence. Don't let the last chapter be one of being forgotten. Together, we can write something better. Together, we can remind every veteran still waiting that someone still sees them. Please like, comment, and subscribe for more true, touching stories that honor unsung heroes. Thank you for watching. We'll see you in the next one.